From KATU News, this is Your Voice, Your Vote with Steve Dunn.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Angelica Thornton, filling in for Steve Dunn on this Labor Day weekend. Today's guest is someone who knows what it's like to sit in a political hot seat. He was elected to his office with more than 70% of the vote in 2020. He campaigned on criminal justice reform, and his progressive view has earned him praise and criticism. It's been a busy 3 years for Multnomah County District Attorney Mike Schmidt. Since he became DA, the city of Portland has been in the national spotlight for protests, open drug use, and crime. Here to discuss some of Multnomah County's most pressing problems and how his office is addressing them, Multnomah County District Attorney Mike Schmidt. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Angelica.
Okay, there's a lot to talk about. Let's start with Measure 110. Oregon voters passed Measure 110 3 years ago, which decriminalized certain amounts of hard drugs. Did you support this measure from the beginning?
I did. And, you know, I think Oregon voters saw what I saw, which is that addiction is a health issue. And they took the brave step of saying, we need to stop using the criminal justice system as our access point to health care. So I supported the measure. I still stand by that we shouldn't use the criminal system to get people access to treatment. There are things that I think can be improved on Measure 110, and clearly the services did not come fast enough. So I'm excited now that I'm starting to see some things opening up, like a fentanyl detox center just opened up. I was at the ribbon cutting last week, but we need more of that to come online.
Shortly after the measure passed, you wrote, the passage of ballot Measure 110 sends a clear message of strong public support that drug use should be treated as a public health matter rather than a criminal justice matter, what you just mentioned. You said past punitive drug policies and laws resulted in over-policing of diverse communities, heavy reliance on correctional facilities, and a failure to promote public safety and health. It's time to move beyond these failed practices, expand access to treatment, and focus our limited law enforcement resources to target high-level commercial drug offenses. You know that Measure 110 is being blamed for a lot of problems happening in downtown Portland right now: homelessness, crime, open drug use. So do you still fully support the measure?
I still fully support the idea that addiction treatment needs to be a health care issue and not a criminal justice issue. I think that there are things that we can improve upon with the measure. I think, you know, you look out nationally, and fentanyl is hitting communities across this country, and across our state is no exception. Oregon ranks 33rd in terms of overdose rates, so we're not in the top third where states still have criminalized addiction. So we know that we can break the system in terms of using healthcare instead of the criminal system. So I still very much support us doing that, but we need the treatment to come online.
Is that where you consider the failures? Is that what you see as the failures with Measure 110?
I see that the treatment didn't come fast enough, but it is opening up now, so that's a positive thing. I do think that we need to take a hard look at open use on our streets. I think it's time to recognize that that doesn't make people feel safe, and that's a big problem for us. Businesses, our community, we also have to interact on a normal day, going to work, going to school, things of that nature. So I think looking at open use on our street is another area where we should maybe look at changing the law a little bit.
In what ways would you consider it a success?
Well, I think, like I mentioned before, a fentanyl detox facility opened up. Before Measure 110, Oregon ranked something like 49th in the country in terms of access to treatment services. So there's been massive investment that now has been allocated by the voters to be put into our treatment systems. I expect with those investments, we're going to start to see that Oregon is ranking much higher in terms of people having the ability to get into treatment. So they're slow in coming, but I think it's a success to start getting people into treatment when they want it on demand.
We are working on a town hall on Measure 110. Some of the people we've talked to say it needs to be amended, that there needs to be some kind of mandate for people to get into those treatment centers. What do you think about that?
Well, I think, you know, Oregon took a very bold step. We've been doing things with the war on drugs for the last 5 decades. And like you mentioned in the statement that I wrote at the time, we saw a lot of disparity, we saw a lot of incarceration, and we know that that wasn't working, and is evidenced by the 2/3 of states that still have worse overdose death rates than we do here in Oregon. So we know that that's not working. Voters took a bold step. But we're the first in the nation to do something like this. So the idea that we should be looking at it, seeing what's working, what's not working, be willing to make some changes that make sense, I think we should absolutely have that conversation.
Two recent polls showed a majority of Oregon voters support the repeal of Measure 110. What do you say to that? What do you say to the people behind that?
Well, you know, when I talk to voters and community members, I like to ask people in the audience, how many people here, raise your hand if you know somebody who has dealt with addiction? Every hand in the room will go up. Then I say, how many of you keep your hands up if you think that the person you have in your mind, your loved one, just needed to be put in a jail cell or needed to go to prison and that would have helped? And almost every hand goes down. So when you talk about addiction as a personal issue with people, they know that people need treatment. So I think we need to focus on making sure that the delivery of those treatment resources is actually available for people's loved ones when they need it.
Do you think people's opinions change when you put a face on the problem? Is that what you're saying?
I think that's exactly right. When you humanize it and when you talk about the person in our lives, and I have people in my life who have struggled with addiction, when you talk about that, people know and they recognize, yes, treatment is what we need.
Law enforcement is obviously in a tough position when it comes to 110 since drugs have been decriminalized. What do you see as the role of police when they come across people who are using drugs in public? We see it, we hear it all the time in Portland.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a couple things. One, we should absolutely be focusing on people who are dealing drugs on our streets, dealing fentanyl. My office has been aggressive in prosecuting people who are dealing fentanyl. We also worked with the legislature recently to pass a bill that actually tightened up the amount of fentanyl that you could possess to make it clear that you couldn't have a lot of it because only a very little amount can be a lethal dose. So on the law enforcement side of things, we absolutely need to be focusing on people who are dealing and people who are possessing substantial quantities. But Measure 110 does have a citation criminal justice function on it where police officers can still get people a citation and refer them to treatment. We know that that's not been incredibly successful in people accessing it, but they can still disrupt the behavior by interacting with somebody and giving them a citation.
You ran for Multnomah County DA as a criminal justice reformer, which some people equate as soft on crime. So let's talk about that. How do you convince people that reform doesn't necessarily mean soft on crime?
Oh, reform absolutely doesn't mean soft on crime. The old tough on crime, soft on crime, 1990s framing of this issue is incredibly outdated. We have decades of research that shows, and even in states, mind you, like Texas, that are much more conservative, have realized that we can be smarter on crime, which means we focus on things that actually make us more safe, not just chest thumping and saying, hey, the longer the prison sentence, the more safe we are. Because we have decades of research that shows, A, that that's not true, and B, the United States is the most incarcerated nation in the world, and we're not the safest. So we need to be smarter about how we use those resources. Building more prisons means we're building less schools, we're building less hospitals. So we have to strike a balance, and that's what criminal justice reform actually means, is holding people accountable, which my office absolutely does. Our prosecution rates are higher than my predecessor's prosecution rates. But then when we are talking about what the outcome should be, what the sentence should be, we're tailoring it to the individual to make sure that whatever we're recommending to the judge, that's going to be most likely to create less victims in our community and more public safety.
You just talked about prosecution rates. Would you say that's an example of how your approach is working?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you look at, obviously through the pandemic, we had a challenging time in terms of cases being referred to our office and things like that nature. But you compare our rates in 2023 to 2019 pre-pandemic, and you'll see that we're higher across the board. That doesn't happen by accident or by a philosophy. That means that my prosecutors who are working incredibly hard on weekends, on nights, they're coming in, they're working with law enforcement to build better cases that get sent to our office. So we're collaborating well with police officers, we're making better cases, and our prosecution rates by turn are able to increase.
Is there any way around people equating criminal justice reform with not prosecuting criminals?
This is one of my biggest frustrations, is that people say, criminal justice reform means you don't prosecute. It couldn't be further from the truth. I believe in accountability, but what does that accountability look like? It can look like a drug court that actually gets at people's issues that got them into committing crimes in the first place. For example, we created a new court called the STEP Court that focuses on certain crimes and people that would be going to prison. When we look now a year and a half in at our recidivism rates in that court, it's less than 10%. Recidivism means getting arrested for a new crime within 3 years. Our recidivism rates for that court, less than 10%. The recidivism rates for people coming out of prison, 50%. So we can hold people accountable and get better public safety results.
How do you think about attitudes about criminal justice reform have changed in Multnomah County since you were elected in 2020? Do you think there's the same appetite for it right now?
Well, I think there's a lot of misinformation out there right now about what does criminal justice reform mean. I hear a lot about restorative justice, which is something that I have pursued and been a champion of. And then people conflating that with, again, the whole soft on crime label. Couldn't be further from the truth. Restorative justice is a program that asks victims, what do you need to heal? Probably the most prominent case that we put through a restorative justice process was the case involving the protester and the police officer. We charged Officer Corey Budworth with an assault crime for assaulting a protester, Terry Jacobs. And we put them together and said, hey, instead of a criminal justice process, what do you think about a restorative justice process? They sat down together outside of our system with an independent third party that helped them work through that. Months of work between both of them, and they came to a resolution that our victim felt like actually helped her heal, which was a taped apology by Officer Corey Budworth. So we were able to achieve something that our victim wanted in that case, and certainly has not led to less safety on our streets. In fact, I would say the opposite.
Do you think that would work with a lot of other victims, though? Is an apology enough for most people?
Well, so I think when you talk about restorative justice, we're actually asking them, what is it that you need? For some people, it is an apology. Mm-hmm. For some people, it's more than an apology. But that's up to them in that process. We probably have about 12 cases right now that victims have said, yeah, I'd rather do that than a traditional trial or prosecution. So for some victims, yes. For others, it doesn't. And so it should be victim-led in what they really need to heal.
Much of the rank and file of the Portland Police Bureau don't seem to trust you. So much so, the Oregonian reported that the chief had to issue a memo telling them to stop telling Portlanders that you refuse to prosecute cases. How important is it to you as a DA to have the trust of Portland's rank and file police officers?
Well, it's very important. The system only works if we're working together. If we're not on the same team, then things aren't going to work, and you end up sending the message to the community that they're not safe. So I very much supported the chief and appreciated the chief sending that message out to make it clear that we are prosecuting crimes, and in fact, at a higher rate than what my predecessor was. So it's important. I do things like going out on ride-alongs. I went up recently with the behavioral health unit. I've gone with the FIT team, which is our focus intervention team around gun violence. I've attended the Citizens Academy that Portland Police puts on. And we've developed some really great projects together, like our auto theft task force, which is showing great results, as well as retail theft task force. So I think that we're making a lot of progress from where I started in 2020. We're seeing that kind of collaboration come on.
Which cases are the highest priority in the DA's office right now?
Well, you know, there's not a type of case that we don't charge. We absolutely charge. We look at every case individually and make charging decisions, but certainly homicides. Homicides is where we put our most experienced attorneys. Those are the cases that, you know, we are showing up at the scene, sometimes at 2 or 3 in the morning to work side by side with law enforcement on the investigation part, as well as then the prosecution part. In fact, this month, I'm creating a new homicide unit that is just going to focus on that with our most experienced attorneys so that they can have that kind of hand-in-glove relationship with the homicide detectives in the Portland Police Bureau.
Let's talk a little bit about the numbers. A Multnomah County dashboard on shooting incidents shows that from the time period of January 1st to July 31st, there were 75 prosecutions in 2019, 91 in 2020, 118 in 2021, 136 in 2022, and 132 this year. Again, that's for the first 7 months of each of those years. What do these numbers say about the prosecution rates in your office?
Well, it shows you that we're doing our job. It shows you that we're getting the cases, we're prosecuting those cases, we take gun cases incredibly seriously. It also is a sad comment on what is happening on our streets, because our prosecutions are, of course, a reflection of what is happening in our community. So as our gun violence cases are rising, that's a reflection of gun violence in our community rising as well.
We hear from Portlanders who want the quickest solutions possible to this spike in crime. A quick fix is unrealistic, but do you think a coordinated law enforcement crackdown across the board would bring us quicker results?
Well, there's actually a lot of research on this, and the research says that the more likely it is that somebody gets caught, the more likely they're going to be deterred from committing the crime. It's not so much about what the sentence ends up being 2 years down the road, but whether or not I'm going to get held accountable for what I'm doing. So absolutely, I think that there are ways that we can be more present, and we can make those arrests, get those cases referred to our office. Those things would all help deter more crime.
Is that what's happening with the auto theft task force? Because it has been highly publicized.
That's exactly right. The auto theft task force is not only showing out on missions, these stolen vehicle operations, they call them SVOs. They're doing that work, but they're also targeting individuals who are known to law enforcement to be highly engaged in this type of activity. So we're not just looking for one-offs, but looking for people who are maybe involved in stealing 15, 20 or more cars. That puts a big dent in stolen cars.
Let's talk about the impact the state defense attorney shortage has had on your office and other offices around the state. Lawmakers passed 2 bills earlier this year to address the public defender crisis, but it's a problem that will take time to solve. You've been talking about this shortage for a while. How many court cases has your office had to dismiss because of this?
Well, and I'll correct just slightly the way it was phrased. The court dismisses our cases.
Right.
So we bring the case, we file the charges, and then if there's not a defense attorney there to appoint in the courtroom,
it has to be dismissed.
The judge says, I have to dismiss this case.
How is that impacting you?
Oh, it's awful. And it's awful because it's bad, of course, for our victims of crime who are getting accountability delayed. And the famous quote, justice delayed, justice denied. It hurts our victims first and foremost. It hurts public safety. Again, back to the research, we know that when people are held accountable, and we can do that quickly in relation to the temporal proximity to the crime, we're going to have better public safety outcomes. Quite frankly, it's bad for the people who are accused of these crimes. They constitutionally deserve representation, and when their cases are dismissed, if they go out and commit more crimes and then come back into our system, now they're not just facing one charge, they're facing multiple charges.
What kind of cases are we talking about here that are getting dismissed?
The vast majority of the cases that are being impacted by this lack of representation are what we would call C felonies or property crimes mainly. So serious property crimes like stolen vehicles is one of the top types of cases that we're seeing get dismissed.
What additional steps would you like to see the state take to address this critical shortage?
Yeah, I think the legislation that they passed is a key start to what they have to do. We need more resources. There was a study that came out and said that we only have about 1/3 of the defenders that we need to handle the entire amount of caseload in our state. So increasing the number of public defenders is absolutely a crucial step. I think that we also have to look at how those services are delivered, how they're being spread out across not only Multnomah County, but now this is affecting our entire state, statewide. So how are we allocating those resources? But we need a lot more of them.
A new Justice Integrity Unit was established last year. This unit reviews claims of innocence, helps with remedying wrongful convictions. How is that unit working so far? What kind of response are you getting to that?
I'm so proud of the work that our Justice Integrity Unit is doing. A lot of district attorneys' offices have what they call a conviction integrity unit, which just means, did we get the conviction right? And if not, we should be willing to change it. The justice integrity mandate is much broader. It's talking about how do we have justice integrity in our system. So that means looking back at cases where maybe there was disproportionate sentencing. We know that in our criminal system for decades that depending on your race or ethnicity, you might be treated differently. We're able to look back and look at those cases and maybe fix some of those things. We're helping people get expungements. People who earn their expungements, they're out of the system, they're doing everything we want. They're working jobs, they want to move on with their life, but they're prevented from doing that because they have a conviction on their record that they can't get rid of. And so it's preventing them from, if it's a felony, maybe even attending high school basketball games that their kids are participating in, or getting a job or housing. So helping people who have earned it get those convictions off their records are also incredibly important ways that they can step forward.
You're running for re-election. Why?
Well, I'm running for re-election because ultimately I'm a very hopeful person. I'm a very optimistic person. I believe in the job that I've started, and it takes time. It takes a long time to change the way that we've been doing things in our system for a long period of time. We know, again, that our incarceration rates historically in the United States are incredibly high. Disparity in our system is high. That we don't always get victims what they need to heal. These are all projects that we've just begun to work on, and we've been beginning to work on those in some of the most challenging background in terms of the pandemic and other things that we've faced. So we're getting started. Things like our STEP court, which is the treatment court I mentioned, that's getting better recidivism rates. The auto theft task force that we've seen in 2023, stolen car numbers are 20% down from where they were in 2022. We're working outside of the criminal system on things like gun violence, partnering with OHSU to establish a homicide review commission so that they can help us get preventative. A lot of times the district attorney's office is reactive. A crime happens, we prosecute. How do we get in front of those things? And I think that there are ways that we can do it by partnering with other people. So the work is really just getting started, and I think it needs to take hold, so I'm looking forward to continuing.
You have been targeted by a local advocacy group. We've seen the billboards on the side of the highway. They're really making you the poster child for a lot of the problems Portland is facing right now. Does that concern you as you look toward your re-election campaign?
Well, dark money in politics is always concerning to me. When people don't disclose who their money's coming from and what their agenda is and why they're saying these things, that's always a threat to democracy. So yeah, that I think is concerning. But I think what you said is exactly right. They're trying to look for a silver bullet or a poster that is going to solve all of these issues. These issues didn't get here. We didn't get here overnight. I've just begun the work these last 3 years of starting to do these things, and we're seeing good public safety outcomes with the prosecution rates increasing, more people being held accountable for serious crimes, and then when we're putting them into programs, we're getting better results. So the work is just beginning. I think the challenge is talking to community members and voters to help them understand that this is a complex system. If there aren't public defenders, then cases don't move. If there aren't enough police officers on the street, then crime is not deterred. So there are real challenges that our system faces, and there's no silver bullet or billboard that's going to solve that.
Your senior deputy is running against you. How has that affected the day-to-day affairs in your office? Has it affected the day-to-day affairs?
It really hasn't affected the day-to-day affairs. I mean, I essentially run a 250-person law firm, and he's one of the mid-level managers in our office. And so we're continuing to do the work every day. My focus is on the challenges facing our community. So looking at those things like the auto theft and gun violence and issues like that, that's where my focus is.
A lot has happened since you were elected in May of 2020, including months of racial injustice protests after the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. There was also the pandemic, of course, which impacted the local criminal justice system. Given your last 3 years in office, how have your thoughts on criminal justice reform changed, if they have at all?
Well, I'll tell you, it's become even more clear to me that reform is key to safety. Being focused on what actually works and makes us more safe is critical because we have scarce resources. So how do you prioritize those scarce resources to make sure that we're getting a better impact? So when I talk about programs where there are recidivism rates that are lower, that's less victims in our community. So the old way of, thumping our chest and saying, lock them up for as long as you want, that was actually driving criminality. So if anything, these last 3 years have really reinforced for me the need for us to continue forward, stick to our values, which is that we know that we can work on the root causes of issues. We can incorporate ideas of forgiveness and fiscal responsibility into our criminal justice system and get better results.
I know you said we're just getting started on a lot of these efforts, but what do you hope to accomplish before the end of this term?
We have some big things, some big projects going on in our office right now. So again, I want to see the auto theft task force is just getting started. I want to see those numbers continue to trend down, auto thefts in our community. I'll give you an example of a good outcome that we received around catalytic converter thefts. A couple years ago when I was just getting started, we were really seeing a rash of catalytic converter thefts in our community. We went to the legislature, we got the law changed, and since then, since that law has gone into effect, those have decreased by 40%. So what I'm focused on between now and my next term is going to be seeing some of these things continuing to drive more and more public safety. Also, getting the message out there to people. People don't feel safe. That's real. there are real feelings in our community. How can we help reinforce people that the police officers are showing up every day doing fantastic work? My deputy district attorneys are showing up every single day, working nights and weekends, have big caseloads, and they're doing the things to help keep this community safe. So I think getting that message out there is really important to our community to let them know that we're making progress. There's still more work to do.
Multnomah County District Attorney Mike Schmidt, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.